welcome to this panel, which gathers today two inspiring women. One of them is online with us here right now, Jane Goodall, and one of us hopefully will join us in a few minutes. I will start by introducing these women whose commitment to protecting biodiversity has set the path for generations of decision makers. First, Jane Goodall, welcome here with us today, an activist, anthropologist, zoologist. Through 60 years of groundbreaking work, Jane Goodall has not only shown the urgent need to protect chimpanzees from extinction, she has also redefined species conservation to include the needs of local communities and the environment. We're also honored to have on this panel, hopefully in a few minutes, Razan Al-Mubarak. For more than 20 years, Razan has played a vital role in guiding the United Arab Emirates towards a more sustainable future, while spearheading a progressive environmental protection, species conservation, and climate action across West Asia and globally. In 2021, Razan was elected president of the International Union for Conservation of Nature. She also serves as the UN Climate Change High-Level Champion for the leadership team of COP28. Welcome, Jane. You are here live in Paris at the Paris Peace Forum. So my first question will be for you, Jane. In 1977, you have founded the Jane Goodall Institute. What was the Institute's initial mission, and what did it bring to the table over the years when it comes to promoting the protection of biodiversity on the global stage? Jane, just 1 minute. Can we hear Jane? Can we do a quick test?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you perfect. Yes.
Okay, good. Well, I was going to say, first of all, I wish I was with you in person, and hello to everybody. The Jane Goodall Institute was created because I needed to have an organization that would enable me to raise money to carry on with the research on chimpanzees. But right from the beginning, I decided it would be for research, conservation, and education. And since that day in 1977, there are now 27 Jane Goodall Institutes in 27 countries around the world. And our mission is continuing to do research on chimpanzees now in 7 different African countries, to work obviously on saving their environment, and that's the forests. And this is particularly important because, of course, it's the forests that capture CO2 from the atmosphere, and that's very important for global warming. But it also struck me way back in the early 1980s that unless we work to alleviate poverty in the communities around the chimpanzee study sites, then there was no way we could save chimpanzees, forests, or anything else. Because when people are living in poverty, they destroy the environment simply in their struggle to survive. So whereas Gombe used to be a part of a forest belt stretching right across Africa to the west coast, by the early 1980s, I looked down in horror to see a little island of conservation of forests surrounded by completely bare hills. And there was this sort of thing I'd seen in other African countries where we were looking at chimpanzees. And so these people, they were lacking good agricultural land, they were lacking good facilities for education and health, their communities were growing, their land was getting degraded, they were moving out into the forests with their cattle. And that's when it hit me. If we don't help these people to find ways of making a living without destroying the environment, then we might as well give up. And so that led to the Jane Goodall Institute's Take Care, or Tokari program, which is now in all of these 7 African countries and making a huge difference. And then finally, what's the point of doing all this if young people are not growing up to understand the importance of saving the environment? So we started our Roots and Shoots program for young people from kindergarten through university, now in about 70 countries.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Jane. I know we're going to talk about roots and shoots in more details in a few minutes. I just saw Razan coming on the screen, so can just the tech team confirm if she's online or not? And in the meantime, we'll just carry on with Jane. Yeah, amazing. So in this panel that talks about climate conservation and nature, forests are obviously a key topic to discuss here today. Forests are our natural allies. And Jane, I know you've always had a powerful connection to forests. That's actually where you did your first study in Gombe, Tanzania in 1960, so no less than 63 years ago. So also, something to consider for us here today is that forests cover almost a third of the global land area and harbor most of the Earth's terrestrial biodiversity. Jane, from your research, the Jane Goodall Institute and beyond, from your field studies, how would you define the importance of forest habitats for biodiversity and communities as well?
Unbelievably important, and tragically, all around the world, forests are being destroyed, even as we speak now. And I just come directly from the Brazilian Amazon, and I was utterly shocked to see the extent of the logging, the cattle moving into the forest and destroying the forest, turning forest into pasture lands. I was shocked to see the illegal gold mining, which is not only destroying all life in the river and terribly harming the indigenous people, but gradually it's destroying the very environment that the rivers flow through. And this is happening all over the world. I've seen it with my own eyes, and it's a major tragedy. And of course, forests, along with peatlands and the kelp sea forests, they really do play a major role in absorbing CO2 from the atmosphere. And they're absolute, I mean, the diversity of plants and animals in the forest, incredible. Certainly in the Amazon, certainly in the Congo, and other parts of Malaysia and Indonesia. And everywhere where there are forests, you get this rich biodiversity, which is something we need for our future.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Jane. Talking about forest conservation and the Amazon, we've seen that recently a lot of grassroots organizations made tremendous progress. I'm thinking about the IRS group in Venezuela. I'm also talking about many indigenous communities in Brazil. So when it comes to community leadership and conservation, I would like to bring today the topic of grassroots organizations and their role. So just a quick recap, grassroots groups are ordinary citizens like us that come together to address a common grievance on a local level to bring about change on a local or regional, national, even international level. So Jane, as you were mentioning earlier, the Roots and Shoots program was created a few decades ago, and the Jane Goodall Institute has always been keen on developing grassroots initiatives, specifically involving the youth through the Roots and Shoots program that you were mentioning earlier. So I would like to ask you, why is it so important to involve local communities in conservation initiatives? And why did you create the Roots and Shoots program, focusing specifically on youth involvement?
Well, as I said, if local communities aren't understanding that protecting the environment isn't just for wildlife. That was the great thing when we began Tukari. It was a group of local people going into the 12 villages around Gombe and asking them what we could do to make their lives better. And it was produce more food, better education, and better health. And we began there, and then we moved out to scholarships to give girls a chance of secondary education. We provided family planning information. We brought in microcredit based on Muhammad Yunus's Grameen Bank, so that, and I find this works really well, because if people take out a small loan and they succeed in paying it back from their small environmentally sustainable program or small business, then they're proud. I've done it myself. And then if they want, they can ask for a slightly larger loan. So this involving of the community, we now find in 7 countries that the people totally understand that protecting the environment is for their future, and they have become our partners in conservation. And it's just incredible to see the difference that this has made. And the forests have come back around Gombe. There's no more bare slopes anymore. And so, as I said, this effort is not much use if young people aren't going to grow up to buy into it. So Roots and Shoots began with 12 high school students in Tanzania who were worried about the illegal dynamite fishing. They were worried about street children with no homes. They were worried about the poaching in the national parks, the cruel treatment of dogs, and so on. And so I said, all right, you go and get your friends and we'll have a meeting. And so we had about 30 young people. We discussed it and we said, okay, we'll form an NGO. The most important message will be every single one of us, and that means everybody in this room who's listening. Every single one of us makes some impact every day, and we have a choice. Some of us have greater choice than others as to what kind of difference we're going to take. And because everything is interconnected in the natural world, then we decided that every group of Roots and Shoots would choose 3 projects, one to help people, one to help animals, one to help the environment. And something that's come out of it, as I say, it's now in 70 countries, kindergarten through university and beyond. And something that's come out of it is because we try and bring these young people together from different countries, usually virtually, but they've come to understand that much more important than the color of our skin, our language, our culture, is the fact that we're all human beings. We all laugh, we all cry, we all can love. Unfortunately, as we know today, to our bitter cost, human beings can also hate. But the young people are beginning to understand that we are one human family, and the differences between the different groups are blurring. And it's my main passion now. I'm going to be 90 in 4 months, but I want to see Roots and Shoots grow, and it is growing all the time. We just started it in the middle of an indigenous community in the Amazon, the Brazilian Amazon, and almost every week I hear of a new little group starting somewhere because a child moves from one school to another, or a teacher moves from one school to another. And anybody listening who feels that this is a good idea and wants to contact the Jane Goodall Institute, I will say thank you, because I know that this is something that is helping the planet.
Thank you so much, Jane, and I can testify the relevance of the Roots and Shoots program, as I am myself a youth ambassador for the Roots and Shoots program here in France. If you have any questions on this program, feel free to come talk to me after this conference. Maybe just to sum up on what we were mentioning today together, Jane, and to end on a positive note, what are your thoughts and hopes for the future regarding conservation and climate action?
Well, I think I've got to broaden it out a little bit, because right now we're living in a world at war. And, you know, the 2 major conflicts, Russia, Ukraine, and Israel and Palestine. But then there are about 15 wars in different parts of Africa. There are conflicts within countries. There are demonstrations. The gap between haves and have-nots is getting greater. And because so many people have given up, so many people say, well, it's hopeless. How can we save the environment when everybody's fighting and all the money is going, you know, for war instead of for peace? So my answer to that is there has never been a more important time for us not to give up, for us to say, let's do what we can. We've been blessed with extraordinary brains, amazing intellect. That intellect sadly has made nuclear weapons, it's made guns, it's made bombs, it's made fighter planes. But we're beginning to get together to use our brains for better purposes. And let's use our brains for better ways of making peace with the environment and also with each other. And so, summing up, there's so much damage that we've done to the natural world everywhere. I've seen it everywhere. The pollution and the killing of the soil, the industrial agriculture, particularly the factory farming, where we're perpetrating war on millions of innocent beings who are sentient. And so, at the same time, as I'm going around the world, I'm meeting incredible people, wonderful projects, people determined to restore the environment, to protect the environment, people determined to bring endangered species back from the brink, people determined to do something to alleviate poverty, people beginning to think about their own environmental footsteps and how they can lead a life making a smaller possible demand on our dwindling natural resources, which are finite, by the way. So the main message is, this is not the time to give up. This is the time to get together around the world, young and old, rich and poor, help each other, and use these brains to find ways of stopping these terrible wars. And I would say one thing that's slightly hopeful: average citizens do not want war. Average citizens want to live in peace. They don't want to live in danger of bombs and bullets and live in terror and have families broken and family members killed. So I think it's a great reason for hope, is that most people want peace, so let's get together. And all of you who are listening to me now, you're in positions where you can make a difference. So please do everything you can to help move us towards a more peaceful world with each other, because until we live in real peace with each other, we'll never manage to have real peace with the environment that supports us all and is the future for our children and theirs.
Thank you so much, Jane. This was a wonderful message, and I think it couldn't have been more fit in the frame of the Paris Peace Forum. Thank you so much, everyone, for listening, and I will now let the next panel join us on stage. Thank you, Jane.
I think all of us are incredibly impressed with the inspiring words of a true champion of nature and a true champion of humanity. Jane Goodall has been an inspiration for many of us for decades, and we would love to see her live forever, because she's such an inspiring figure. My name is Stuart Patrick. I'm a senior fellow and director of the Global Order and Institutions Program at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. I'm incredibly honored to be able to moderate this session on No Nature, No Future, tackling the global biodiversity emergency. And this topic is an apt one. The title is an apt one. The dramatic ongoing loss of biological diversity at the species, ecosystem, and genetic level is a planetary emergency that's on a par with climate change, with which it's obviously quite related. It is jeopardizing the countless services that we obtain largely free of charge from nature, from the air we breathe, to the pollination of our crops that we eat. It threatens countless ecosystem services that we get. According to the World Economic Forum, fully half of all global GDP is highly or moderately dependent on benefits from nature. And countries, communities, and companies and communities, unfortunately, are not investing in or safeguarding their capital in the same way that they safeguard or invest in their physical capital or their human capital, and that needs to stop. The most important cause of biodiversity loss is not, in fact, climate change, but it is degradation and despoilation of land and seascapes around the world. Climate change is also very important, but so is pollution. So is the introduction of invasive species and overharvesting. One of the things that we've also come to realize, as Jane Goodall was saying, is that unless we have nature-based solutions, in her case she was speaking of forests, but one could also speak of mangroves, there's no possible way that we will come close to getting the Paris Agreement targets. Fortunately, there is some good news recently. Two recent milestones offer some hope. Last December, at the 15th Conference of Parties of the Convention on Biological Diversity, the countries of the world got together to approve the groundmaking Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, which includes, among other provisions, the so-called 30 by 30 commitment to protect enduringly 30% of terrestrial and marine ecosystems by 2030. This spring, also, UN member states, against all odds, negotiated a high seas biodiversity convention under the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea to govern and sustainably exploit and manage the 61% of the oceans that exists outside of national jurisdiction. I'm going to kick off with questions to each of our panelists here. My first panelist is unfortunately going to have to leave quite soon because he's got to catch a flight, and that is Virginijus Sinkevicius, and he is EU Commissioner for the Environment, Oceans and Fisheries, and prior to his position he served as government minister and member of parliament in Lithuania. Since you have to leave early, I'm gonna double up on the two questions here. The first question is that this global biodiversity framework is billed as a major improvement over what came before, the so-called Aichi targets. And the world, in effect, failed to achieve virtually all of those targets. The new framework comes up with 23 targets that talk about preserving biodiversity through 2030. The question is, will they, or do they have any prospects of bending the curve of biodiversity loss any better? What should be the priorities for international action? So that's priorities there. And then the second regard to this so-called treaty to protect the oceans beyond national jurisdictions. In other words, the high seas, which are often a rather lawless realm. There are a lot of hurdles to actually realizing that. It's a historic achievement, but you still have to figure out how to designate marine protected areas, how to do environmental impact assessments, how to deal with issues of deep seabed mining or the sharing of marine genetic resources. So I'd love to have your ideas not only on sort of what we should focus on with respect to the biodiversity framework, but also when it comes to the oceans, what you see as the main hurdles. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, and it's my pleasure to be with you on the panel, and sorry that I have to leave earlier. But to begin with, I would say that, first of all, it was really a historic achievement, starting with the Kunming-Montreal, which, of course, the key thing is 30 by 30 protection targets. But together with that, I think extremely important part was a different approach, that conservation is not enough anymore, that we need also to restore nature in order to continue with certain economic activities that do not degrade nature. And if some, I believe that, people who gathered here and listened to great words of Jane Goodall and now listening to this panel, there is no dispute in the room about the need of nature conservation. But if some does not, buy it as an argument, I think we need to look for the economic lens. And here you will see a significant dependence of our economy on the ecosystem services. Pollination, soil, water, it's just a few examples that if they're lost, there is no agriculture, so most likely food insecurity, and as we are in a Paris Peace Forum, we know what it means in certain regions. Water scarcity, again, that's another issue. So I think this is a must do, and I'm of course extremely glad that we've managed to agree not only on targets but also on review clauses. Now the next COP supposed to COP16 be a meeting where we finally come with the countries with their plans, with their biodiversity strategies, and we assess the global gap, which wasn't done with the Aichi targets. Even so, I think, sometimes before we achieve something historic and complete, unfortunately, we need to fail. That happened with Copenhagen, and later Paris was a success story with climate. Seems like we have a similar story with biodiversity, but I truly hope that we will throw all our weight behind it. And the good proof of that, and the moment to be optimistic, is actually the BBNJ agreement. It was over 20 years of negotiations. So, you know, to conclude it finally gives a good hope, because oceans, even so they very undeservedly pushed outside the agenda or to the sides of the agenda, even of climate and biodiversity, they play a crucial role in mitigating climate and etc. So the BBNJ agreement finally gives us a hope to have rules, to have a playbook, which then is a fundamental in achieving 30 by 30 target. One last thing which I would like to mention, because it's crucial, I mean, with any of the agreements, any of the targets, is funding. It's always a big debate on funds and funding, and we launched a new fund with the COP15 agreement. But one thing which bears a lot of money in it is harmful subsidies. And this is where we need to focus much better. We can redirect money from the harmful subsidies, that a lot of those activities Jane Goodall mentioned in her speech, to actually implementing the agenda, which I'm pretty sure then we wouldn't be questioning if we can implement it by 2030.
Thank you very much. And on the subsidies front, I attended the Marrakesh meetings and heard Ajay Banga, the president of the World Bank, repeat several times that, you know, subsidies probably, you know, $1.5 trillion perhaps in cost, but that their indirect environmental and other social costs are as much as $7 to $8 trillion. So I second your statement that we really need to get rid of these subsidies. Some of them will have to be phased out gradually, but we need to start doing it. And I will leave it up to you. You have the parole to leave when you need to. And it's been wonderful meeting you. So thank you so much for participating. I now would like to talk and turn to Alvaro Leyva Duran, who is the foreign minister of the country of Colombia. Colombia, as you all may know, is one of the most biodiverse countries in the world, and as my budding ornithologist son, who's a senior in college, is very enthusiastic about, as it has the largest number of species of birds in the world. At the same time, your government is under enormous pressure to deliver on growth and development to its population. And I guess my question is, how does Colombia go about integrating this imperative of biodiversity conservation with the other sorts of priorities, social priorities, and very important ones that your country faces?
Voy a hablar en español. Hablo inglés, pero quiero ser muy preciso.
I will speak Spanish, though I can speak in English. I want to be precise in my words. I was very much impressed by Jane's presentation.
Elocuente explicación, 89 años.
She was very eloquent at her age of 89. She's an expert in gorillas from a region where which I recently visited in Congo. She discovered that chimpanzees have feelings. This is a big discovery, and they use tools, actual tools. We are not chimpanzees, and facing nature, we do not harbor feelings at times. We are in the hands of political decisions, and you are all experts here. The planet pays a high cost to wars. There are 2 wars currently, and the budget for weapons. Imagine if this money went to the planet. When we talk about peace, we often forget about the fact that we must speak about peace with nature. We must make peace with nature and the stars. Why am I saying this? Because someone whom I admired very much said, we are stars. Asteroids preceded life on Earth. Colombia doesn't make up for a fifth, not even a fifth of the planet, but Colombia has more than 1/6 of the planet's biodiversity for animals and vegetation. What we need to save is the Amazon, but everything else as well. As soon as I was appointed minister in my current term, I wanted to realize one of my dreams, to go to Antarctic, and I did that.
De allá salen las corrientes. Es impresionante. Sin corrientes no puede haber naturaleza.
And there
Ha perdido el 30%
are
de su
currents.
capacidad.
Without currents, there would be no nature. We lost 30% of current
Corrientes que tienen distintas
capacities.
temperaturas y que no se
About
mezclan.
80%
La naturaleza no hiciera del agua algo
of drinkable water relies on this. And if there's no mixing,
Una de ellas cuando va llegando
that's a
hacia
problem.
Amazonas,
but there's one
vierte nube,
current.
lluvia,
When it reaches the Amazon,
está la zona
it turns
verde
into
del Amazonas, una de las
clouds
cuencas.
and
Una de
rain,
las
and
cuencas
this
del
gives the green zone we know as the Amazon.
En una reunión de las tres cuencas,
I was just
donde se producen
in Angola, and I
los
was
pulmones en un 80%
in
del
one of
planeta.
the very important place where
Yo no
there's
ya estaba
another
allá, pero quería
lung
ver
of the
eso,
planet,
porque todo se debe a que en la Antártica, como
and I
reza el
wanted to
dicho,
see it
si
with
no
my
hay
own
blanco,
eyes. And
no hay
as we
azul.
often say,
Y si no hay azul, no hay verde.
if there's no
De tal manera que
white color, there's no green, and if there's no green, there's no blue. So
Yo no quisiera
everything
que
is
se tornara
interlinked in nature.
en un diálogo más entre expertos, sino en
I don't
un
want
llamamiento
this
feroz
dialogue to be yet
a la
another
clase política,
expert dialogue. I want it to be
que
an
tome
appeal
conciencia
put to the
ponga
political
las armas
class
en donde las deponga
so that it's made aware
norte de Europa
of the
y en el
need
conflicto que ahora
to
tenemos.
lower their weapons
Como si los judíos y
in
los
Europe
palestinos
and
no hubieran
elsewhere.
tenido el mismo origen en Mesopotamia entre el Tigris y el Éufrates. Es impresionante.
We all have the same origin, and this goes as well for the Israelis and the Palestinians.
Que tiene al mundo perplejo, sino la
And
necesidad
it's
de darle
this, not only
prioridades
this
a la acción
conflict,
política
it's very
mundial,
complex
que
conflict
debería tener sus ojos hoy
occurring
puestos
in the
acá,
world.
para oírlos a ustedes, que son los expertos. de que
But
nos
this is
tenemos
something
mucho
we
que
must
aprender.
do together. Of course, we need to listen to you, experts. We have much to learn
Para traer esta
from you.
voz de alerta.
This
Yo
is a
creo
great
que la
honor for me
primera
to
paz
be
es
here,
con la
to bring
naturaleza.
my voice to this panel because the first peace we need to make is peace with nature.
To hopefully ask about the Amazon and the recent Amazon conference. But first, I'd like to turn to Christophe. Christophe Guilou is Director of Sustainable Development at the Quai d'Orsay. He is a long-serving French diplomat, including having served as ambassador to Cameroon and to Djibouti, I believe. Christophe, it would be great to get your own thoughts about how France is approaching the challenge of global biodiversity conservation. Obviously, the French government, under the leadership of Emmanuel Macron, was a big proponent, partly through the creation with Costa Rica of the High Ambition Coalition for People and Nature, of this 30 by 30 target. But one wonders how that momentum whether that momentum will actually continue. One question related to financing that I'd like to get your thoughts on, or lack thereof. In recent years, recent months even, you've seen so much attention to climate financing, and not least in the Paris Pact, but then also in the recent Africa Climate Summit. From your perspective, Is this a positive development for biodiversity conservation? Is there a way, in a sense, to kind of leverage that those new commitments? Or do you sit there when you think about biodiversity and look wistfully at the fact that all the money is going somewhere else?
Bonjour à tous, merci pour l'invitation.
Thank you for inviting me. Just like the Minister said, I wanted to say I was very much touched by Jane Goodall. When I was a young kid, I lived where she worked, and I was really moved by her words and her wisdom, words on the world's evolution and how to protect our link with nature and this very strong heritage that we need to protect. And let me thank the organizers as well. I'd like to pick up on what the minister from Colombia said. Human nature is currently very slowly destroying biodiversity, and a few days ago we were in Brazzaville together to find solutions on the 3 basins in the Amazonia, Central Africa and Southeast Asia. There's much work to be done. What are we doing? To come back to your question, we are proactive. There are large conventions. You talked about the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. We're trying to find solutions with goals. We must work at it. It's hard. Biodiversity is under attack. And what we're trying to do today is to create a link with climate change and climate warming. We are trying to honor the target of 1.5 degree of the Paris Agreement, and we measure to what degree with climate warming has an effect on biodiversity, a devastating one, and we must make sure that our commitment, with much success and some frustrations, in the fields of climate warming must also be replicated for biodiversity. We need to find funding to protect biodiversity, but we also have to galvanize scientific knowledge. We need to work with experts like Madame Goodall. We need them to explain to us what solutions can be found. On funding, we have organized conferences where solutions can be found. Here, 6 months ago, the French President, Mr. Macron, called a new summit for a new global pact, and he said that we needed to reconcile fighting against poverty and protecting the planet. And this is where we are today. We are trying to find more resources and making sure that with the courage of the political sphere, implement the action against climate change and the degradation of biodiversity while fighting against poverty as well. And there's an important work to be done on forest. We know that forests help us a lot when it comes to dealing with CO2, and we need to work a great deal on this with the international community. So we are currently working through country packages on climate and forest, and in a few days we will announce a new one at COP28. So we are working on very technical issues, as you know. This is linked with financial matters. This is very much technical, and we must stay the course. We must restore the biodiversity of this beautiful planet.
I will turn to you in a little bit to pick up on some of the other financing issues, but I want to turn now to Selina Chien, who's founder and director of Overstories, which is a creative studio focused on producing strategic campaigns that advocate for nature. She's also an acclaimed photographer and a member of the board of the environmental organization Pantera. So Selina, from the sound of it, your studio seeks to leverage a number of different types of media, not only photography, to tell stories and galvanize public sentiment for biodiversity conservation. And let me ask a couple of linked questions here. I guess it'd be great to get for you to share with us some of the things that you've learned about what strategies and approaches are most successful when it comes to targeting and connecting with potential allies in this campaign, particularly young people who may be less than thrilled with the white papers of the sort that I write at my think tank, despite the fact that they're beautifully written. And then also, what does it take in your view to then turn this empathy and passion for nature and wild species into actual political mobilization and pressure on actors with influence?
Thank you, Stuart. That's quite a big question. I think it's a question that everyone is asking themselves. I think first and foremost, the change that we need in this world is not just, publications and the collecting of data, or even new finance frameworks, or more conferences like these, or more agreements. To be completely honest, we're staring at a sixth mass extinction, a climate catastrophe, and an ecological breakdown in the eye. And as someone who is from the younger generation, we're not too pleased with the apocalypse that we've inherited. And so the solution is a complete transformation of our relationship to nature. The solution is a reassessment of how we see ourselves in the world and how we want to be interacting with it, how we want to be interacting with each other within it. And we are human beings, and as much as we'd like to think that we make decisions based off of rationality and logic, we ultimately make decisions based off of our instinct, based off of how we're feeling, based off of our hearts, and we seek facts in the world that confirm what we already believe. And that's why I, having been trained as a scientist and ecologist, and then moving into photography, and now with a studio, that's why I moved towards creative storytelling, because it is through creativity, it is through imaginative new solutions and new methodologies and new frameworks that we're actually going to capture the minds and the hearts, most importantly, of people, because behavior change is what we need, and we can have as many new agreements and as many new policies in place, but people need to be ready for them, and people need to be met where they're at. And I think with so many of these conversations about the environment, we think that it's something that only people within the world of the environment, or within rooms like this, that have the expertise to talk on it. But the problem is, the biodiversity crisis will affect every single part of our life. It's an existential crisis. And it needs to be made relevant to everyone. And what we do at Overstories is we take the stories, the information, the data of communities, and we want to link it to the resources, the willpower, the mobilization of commerce, of government. And the way we do that is by infiltrating culture, by infusing all levels of culture with the biodiversity agenda, because that's where people are spending their time. That's where people are coming together. That's where people are feeling, are enjoying, are living. And if you look at the last, century of some of the greatest cultural movements, whether it's through music and theater or art, quite a lot of the time, those movements are born out of moments of great social change. And we are living in one of those moments. And maybe it's both social change as well as of environmental change, and what will come from our imaginations, and how can we leverage that in order to change people's hearts and minds when it comes to nature conservation, biodiversity, and reassessing our relationship with the natural world.
Yeah, I love the focus that you have on narratives and storytelling. I was recently reminded by our director of studies at the think tank that I work on that, remember, you're storytellers, and if you're not storytellers, you're not going to get your message across. And I've actually even seen some institutions begin to make a transformation for the good. The president of the World Bank recently released their new strategic plan, in a sense, and it's eliminating poverty on a livable planet, and they added on a livable planet to sort of to underscore the fact that we have entered into a fundamentally new relationship with the planet. And I believe that historians, when they come back and look at this era, will be absolutely astonished that we didn't recognize this sort of Copernican revolution of the advent of the Anthropocene any more than we have today. And I just think it has to, in a sense, cause a redefinition of everything.
Can I just add something very, very quickly? I think also what's important is meeting people where they're at. Most people don't know what the World Bank is. Most people don't know what the Paris Peace Forum is. Most people don't understand what happens at COP and what happens in that room. But a lot of people are listening to what Kim Kardashian is saying. A lot of people are watching the World Cup and watching sports. And it's these places in culture, whether it's media and entertainment, which is one of the largest industries, consumer-facing industries in the world, whether it's through sports, it's finding where people are and finding the target audiences that we need to be speaking to, and what is the message we need to be delivering to them, catering and reframing the narrative for those audiences in a way that they will be most receptive to, in a way that is in their language and appeals to the values that are most important to them.
Thanks so much for that addition, Selena. Let's turn to Tahir Aziz, who's a senior advisor for South Asia at Conciliation Resources, which is a rare international peace-building effort that operates in a sense across the India-Pakistan border, including in Punjab, but also in Kashmir. One of the attractions of the Paris Peace Forum, as I said in an earlier session today, is that it actually has a very broad conception of peace, and its recognition, as the foreign minister was saying, that one of the foundations of peace is, in fact, environmental sustainability and the protection of nature. You've also come to see cooperation to prevent or reverse or adapt to nature's degradation as a possible avenue towards peace. And I've seen this elsewhere as well. When people talk about shared watercourses, it's often about conflict, but actually what one finds is that these can be pathways to peace. So it'd be great to hear a little bit about what you've learned about the potential for collaboration on environmental challenges to build peace, and whether or not this is a lesson that could even be expanded to, say, I don't know, have the United States and China work together on the environment. That would be something to see.
Well, thank you, Stuart. And so much has been said, which is very inspiring, and I think it will help us build a better narrative. But coming to your question, I think the peace itself is a quite a wider concept, and it's a lot of it is aspirational, and it's a pursuit that we have, but a lot of it is also practical, and if you look at ecology, it's a similar construct, which is a lot of it is practical today, but a lot of it depends on the pursuit for tomorrow. And when they two interface each other, they create opportunity, but they also can create opportunity negatively. And I think that's the nexus that where we have found ourselves in terms of trying to capitalize on that in a positive way. And the joint venture, environmental venture between the two sides, India and Pakistan, is exactly trying to do that, capitalize on the opportunity that climate action and environmental cooperation can provide for making relations between the adversarial countries, India and Pakistan in this case, better, and that improvement of relationship hopefully then makes more space for better climate to prevail. And that's the theory that informs this. But in terms of the practice of it, it emerged out of a very long standing work that we started doing with communities back in Kashmir on both sides of the line of control. involving providing space basically for shared analysis, but then collaborating across the line of control to shape their own future, to work better for cross-line of control trade, and then also in terms of disaster management, which actually is a massive issue in Kashmir, which affects biodiversity, but in practical life of people, it's a very ongoing issue. But there is a line of control, there is a military, and the militarization, as we know, is an established fact that it affects the biodiversity and climate, and it prevents the action. So the idea has been to allow spaces for communities to come together and then also over time build trust, which is fundamental. So it's kind of the nexus between politics and climate work. And often we learned that you cannot choose one over the other. I mean, particularly where there is, you know, the contested borders and contested lands. So you can't just sort of assume that there is safe space for climate action, for example. That has been our lesson. So what it means is that you have to work painstakingly on relationships, on creating spaces with a lot of understanding of the conflict sensitivity that the identities and contested identities are bringing to that mix. And often we also see that climate emergency or biodiversity emergency, which is not necessarily an ongoing emergency, right? It's not seen as a crisis that is there. It doesn't really remain there as a permanent crisis. It comes in the form of floods, in the form of earthquake, in the form of lack of water, but then it goes and then it just, people retract to their own identities, original identities, and conflict prevails. So it involves a lot of pre-crisis work. That's where it's built upon. So our work in Kashmir and with Indians and Pakistanis over time enabled this space for scientists, business people, environmentalists, and people interested in terms of political dialogue to come together and to create. And your question about the US-China, I think this is the same lesson that I would say. I personally think that just to assume that climate change collaboration can happen apolitically is something that puzzles me. I would say that it doesn't have to be contingent on a lot of development on other political issues, but it cannot be oblivious. It can't be divorced from that. So we have to take the same view where parties, in this case US and China, are confident that their other issues are not just brushed aside, and they are there. And I think confidence and trust, of course, is a fundamental thing at the community level, but also at the global level.
Thank you very much. Christophe, do you have time for one question here? I guess I was going to talk about efforts to leverage the private sector and global finance in the biodiversity battle. A big step in the climate field was when governments started to insist that institutional investors disclose their exposure to climate-related risks, and something similar appears to be going on in the biodiversity space with the Task Force on Nature-Related Financial Disclosures. Is that something that is a potential avenue towards leveraging the private sector for biodiversity and nature, sensitize them to nature loss and its costs to the bottom line?
Oui, je suis désolé, je vais être obligé de partir. Merci pour la question.
Thank you for your question. I will have to leave very quickly. Of course, we need to find additional funds. So we need to find projects. We need to mobilize people and raise awareness. And I really feel how young people are impatient on the planet that we're trying to transform. So we're trying to find ways to make sure that the private sector, businesses do more in order to preserve and conserve biodiversity. And it's actually in international agreements. There are commitments that were made a few years ago, including the task force that you mentioned, asking large businesses to measure their impact on biodiversity, because they also need that to continue with their business. But we need to know if what they do has an impact on the degradation of biodiversity. So that's the first thing. The second thing is related to biodiversity credits that are emerging. We need to work on this topic. So France and Great Britain launched a working group a few months ago here in France, and we hope to be able to present our work at the next COP, COP28, to show the progress that was made on biodiversity credits. And beyond that, regarding the mobilization of the private sector, France and Kenya are working on a working group to try and set up a framework for thoughts in order to preserve the planet, climate and biodiversity. The second player that is key is philanthropy beyond the private sector. We need philanthropy because such entities have mechanisms that differ from the public sector, but we work with them on country packages, and we hope to be able to work with seed funds, and it will be for everybody's good. So this is a sector, a player that's very important for our actions. Thank you, Christophe. And I know that you have to go to another meeting, so thank you so much.
Another question for Alvaro, which is really about the role of regional cooperation, particularly with respect to the Amazon basin. The countries of the Amazon basin got together, I understand, in August, and there was a roadmap that was created for protecting tropical forests, but to the disappointment of some environmentalists, there were no real concrete commitments to end deforestation. When you look at regional cooperation with respect to the Amazon, are there certain priorities or hurdles that need to be overcome in this field?
Antes de venir a la sala, usted me dijo que había estado en la reunión de las cuencas.
Entering the room, you told me that I told you that I attended this meeting, and you too. So it's not actually the Amazon; it's Amazon, Congo, and Borneo, Mekong. So that's where we were. This type of meeting does not happen very easily. It represents 80% of the lungs of the planet. So it wasn't easy to reach a conclusion in a document that would reflect our ideas. We depend on forests, and we can only witness its destruction. But it's such a key principle. I was with President Petro at a bilateral meeting with President Biden 1 year ago. And President Petro, who's somebody who's very determined and obsessed with saving the planet, said, Mr. President, why don't we work to exchange debt against nature? And he said, well, I've been working on the same thing for 25 years old, so we agree. And I told President Petro when we left the meeting, I said, you know, it goes well beyond the Amazon. Because when small countries say that, you know, it has a certain weight, and when President Biden says something, it has another weight. So that's an idea that he mentioned, exchanging, swapping debts against nature, but it revolves around 3 basins. So a global solution has to be found. We started thinking of a new Bretton Woods agreement. Bretton Woods were necessary after the Second World War in order to rebuild. The competitiveness of the market had to be rebuilt. That's why there were Bretton Woods instruments, the World Bank, among others. Now it's not about rebuilding, but saving, to save the future. It's a completely different philosophy, and that's why we need a financial architecture that's differentiated. Everything you know, everything you do should help us build a better future. I think there is an experience with Ecuador, $1 billion for the Galapagos Islands. We were able to find $1 billion for the island. So, as leaders who are concerned by such topics, we should work on reforming financial systems. There are green bonuses, green bonds. That's not enough to fight against deforestation. Costa Rica did it. I'm aware of it. I lived there. So that's something that we can do, but we need to go beyond our own experience. We prepared the outcome meeting with the Treaty on the Amazon that took place in Belém do Pará in Brazil. We saw that there were very wise people who had solutions. But then it turned into a bureaucratic matter. So all these lessons, all this scientific knowledge is still in the hands of countries that are more interested in knowing who's going to be the next Secretary General of the United Nations. So I'm very happy to be here today because I know that among you there are people who know a lot, but it's a wake-up call. We need to draw attention of politicians and leaders.
If there's going to be a new Bretton Woods, there certainly should have the word woods attached to it in terms of the survival of the rainforests of the world. I want to thank our illustrious panel. It's really been terrific. A very rich discussion with different generations and different experiences, both at the highest levels of politics and at the community level. So I want to thank the three of you and my two colleagues who already left. Please join me in a round of applause.